other day, somebody asked me what I thought were the most important things that a person needed to consider, questions they needed to ask themselves before going tiny. And I thought that is a great topic for a video. So today, that's what I'm going to go over. The 5 questions you need to ask yourself before you even think about going tiny. Stay tuned. The first question I think you need to ask yourself, and probably the most important one, is are you prepared to get rid of most of your possessions? My house is just under 400 square feet if I count the loft, and I don't actually use the loft because I don't need that space. But I mean, it's going to be a meditation space and obviously a guest room for when family and friends come to visit. But my townhouse that I sold to build my tiny house was 1,200 square feet, and it had a garage. So I had a lot of stuff. I had a lot of furniture, and I had a lot of cooking utensils, a lot of clothes, camping gear, Christmas stuff, things that you accumulate over the years just because of life. And I knew that I would not be able to bring those into my tiny house. I knew I didn't want to because I wanted a fresh start. So that's the first question you have to ask yourself. Are you attached to your things, and are you willing to get rid of probably 2/3? I know in my the few months that I had my house up for sale and I was already building Serendipity, my tiny house, I went through a major decluttering and just getting rid of stuff. And I probably easily got rid of 2/3 of my things. I put the other third into storage for the last few months after I had sold my house until this home was finished. And of that 1/3, probably only half of that 1/3 that I did keep actually made it into this house. Even as I was emptying that storage unit to move things here, I realized I didn't want it, I didn't need it, but it was tough. So you need to ask yourself that question. And am I prepared to get rid of the things in my life that I'm not going to be able to bring? I mean, obviously I kept some sentimental things, but I couldn't bring any furniture. The little bench that I use for a coffee table is the only piece of furniture that I brought into this house from my old place. It was a piece that my son built, my oldest son built, and it makes a perfect little coffee table for my tiny house. But that was the only thing. So everything else I had to sell, give away, donate, and that was tough. So first question you need to ask yourself is, am I prepared to get rid of 2/3 of the things that I own? So feeding off of that first point, yeah, are you prepared to get rid of things, is are you prepared to let go of some sentimental things? Because you have to really decide what you're going to bring into your home. So do you have a lot of collectibles? Have you kept a lot of things from when, say, your children were young? Have you got heirloom pieces, things that were handed down to you from your family members, antiques, things like that that you've purchased throughout your life, or items that you have accumulated through your travels? Those sentimental items, you're not going to be able to bring everything in. I do think that it's really important to decide what are the ones that are non-negotiable that you are going to keep, and therefore you're going to build space in your tiny house for. But you're going to have to, inevitably, you're going to have to let something go. So the sentimental items are going to be a very difficult thing to deal with. So the second question you need to ask yourself is, what are you going to do with the sentimental items that you can't or won't be able to fit into your tiny house? Are you willing to give those away? Are you willing to let them go? My advice would be to just start putting them in piles, and the ones that are just too precious to let go, make sure that you have either a place to display them or a place to store them. I kept my albums and my scrapbooks that I had done when the kids were little, and a very few little sentimental items from when they were little. And I have them in plastic bins in my storage shed, which is underneath the gooseneck. I didn't bring them into the house because they're not something that I look at all the time, but they were things that I was not prepared to let go of. But then there were other things, you know, some collectibles, Christmas ornaments that I'd collected over time, and I knew I couldn't keep. So those were things that I sort of divided up amongst the boys, asked them what they wanted, and let them choose. There were some art pieces that I really loved that I had collected, real art, what I call real art, that I had bought that was, you know, were really kind of precious to me, but they just wouldn't fit in here. And so again, I let the boys take what they wanted, and then I donated or sold what wouldn't fit in here. That was a difficult one for me. But then again, I think it's important to think of yourself, think of what's important to you, decide what matters, and realize that the memories are not in the things. The memories are in your heart, and so maybe take pictures of those things, take pictures of your family with those things, and then let them go, because your space just can't hold it all. So the second question to ask yourself is, are you prepared to let go of some of the sentimental things in your life? So number 3 on the list of questions you need to ask yourself before you decide to build a tiny house on wheels is honestly ask yourself, how tidy am I? Because when you live in a space this small, you have to be tidy. You have to put things away. You have to have a place for things, and you have to put your things in those places. Every day I make sure that my house is tidy. I mean, by nature, I'm a tidy person, and I think that you have to be a tidy person, or you have to be prepared to become kind of a tidy person in order to live in a tiny house, because everything shows. There's no place to hide things, and so if you come in and you just leave your stuff all over the place, it won't take long before your house feels very claustrophobic and very cluttered. You don't have that, like in most houses, like I had in my old place, you don't have that spare room where you can just throw everything in there and close the door when people come to visit. Everything shows. So be really honest with yourself. How tidy of a person are you, and how willing are you to keep things tidy in a small space? Because it really matters, and it really shows. Certainly, you know, if you've been thoughtful with your design and you have made sure that you have a place to store things, it makes it a lot easier because you have a place to put those things. So, you know, I have a nice big front entry closet, which is really important. I see a lot of tiny houses that don't have places they just have hooks by the front door, and there's no closet by the front door. And I think that that's a mistake, to be honest with you, because you don't have a place for your things. It's winter here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and we have boots and toques and gloves and scarves and multiple layers of coats that you need. And you really want to be able to put those away when you come in the door, so you're not tripping over everything and it's just not always out. So the third question you need to ask yourself before you decide to build a tiny house is, how tidy of a person am I? How realistic is it for me to live in a space so small that it basically requires that I put things away as I go and that I keep things tidy? So the fourth question I think you need to ask yourself before you decide to build a tiny house on wheels is, how important is it to host family gatherings? Or will you be okay with not being able to host large family gatherings? Now, I have had my boys over for Thanksgiving dinner, and I have had parties where I've had, 5 guests at a time, so that makes 6 of us, and I've been able to make it work. But it's not the same as having a full-size house where you have a dining room table and everybody can sit down to eat. You can certainly get creative, and in the summertime, if you're lucky enough to live in a climate where you can have an outdoor space for a large portion of the year, or in my case, just in the few months that we're lucky enough to have summer and warm weather where we can sit outside, certainly you can do it outside, which is awesome. And again, you can get very creative for what you do inside. I have a fold-up table that I keep in the shed, and I put it here, and the bench became a seat, and we sat on the couch, and I was able to have a sit-down Thanksgiving dinner with my boys, and it worked really well. But it's not the same. So if you're the kind of person who loves to host huge parties and dinner parties, and that's really important to you, you need to decide if that will work in a tiny house. How you will make it work in a tiny house. Are you willing to be creative? Are you willing to have more frequent smaller gatherings, or perhaps have just appetizers and people can grab something and sit down, but not necessarily a sit-down dinner? I think that there's a lot of really fun, creative ways to entertain in a tiny house, and I've really enjoyed sort of exploring that. And I certainly think my guests have felt welcome, and I've been able to feed them, and we've had a good time. But it's not going to allow you to have huge parties and huge numbers of people over at once. So, number 4 on the list of questions you need to ask yourself and be honest with your answers is, am I prepared not to be able to have the family gatherings, host the family gatherings that I usually do in my tiny house? Number 5 on the list of questions to ask yourself before you build a tiny house on wheels is, are you ready for people thinking that you've lost your mind? When you do something that's very different than the norm, people will start asking questions about what you're doing. They will either secretly or very sort of obviously to your face start to question your sanity. They'll ask you, excuse me, if you are having a midlife crisis. I genuinely think that the majority of the people that question what you're doing, that question your life choices when you decide to go tiny, are doing it because they love you and they're concerned about you, and they want to be sure that you're making decisions that you're not going to regret. So just try and keep that in mind. But it can be difficult to have people questioning what you're doing, especially when you're really excited about it and it's been your dream. I know that I certainly had to deal with that, but it was so obvious that the people that were the most worried about what I was doing were the ones that loved me the most and really cared about me. So while it was tough to have people question my my life choices, maybe not my sanity, but my life choices sometimes, I knew that they were coming to it from a place of love, but I did have to get used to that, and it was difficult at times. So you need to remember that when you go against the grain, when you become an outlier, and I do think that people who live in tiny houses on wheels or on foundations are outliers right now. It's becoming more and more common. Certainly the movement is growing, and people are seeing the beautiful houses that are being built, and they're beginning to understand it's still not common. It's still something that people question. You'll have people say all the time, I've had people say this so much to me, yeah, it's nice, but I could never do it. And absolutely, it's not for everybody, but if it's for you, you need to stay strong. You need to be prepared for people to question what you're doing, and to perhaps not be as supportive at first as you would like them to be, or might need them to be. You need to be strong enough in yourself in what you're doing, and as sure enough about what you're doing, so that you can enjoy the process and you can be strong. If this is something that you're determined to do, if you're passionate about tiny houses, if minimalism is something that resonates with you, if leaving a smaller footprint or just living a simpler life with fewer things is something that you want to do, that feels right for you, then I say go for it. I say, you know, take the challenge and run with it, because it's very exciting. And knowing that you're doing something that not everybody else can do is pretty cool, actually. And it's not like you're, you know, donating a kidney. This is something that if you want to do it, you can do. And then if down the road you decide that you don't want to do it anymore, you don't have to. You're not signing your life away. You're not, you know, committing to something for the rest of your life. But it's a challenge. I love a challenge. I knew I could do this. After 6 months of living in my tiny house, I've yet to have a single regret. And every one of my friends that had questions about what I was doing now gets it. Ask yourself those hard questions. If you're happy with the answers, then go for it. And enjoy the process and enjoy being an outlier. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. I'd love to hear your comments. What are the other questions that you think that a person should ask themselves before they go tiny? And really, I would love to know if you would ever consider going tiny. So I will talk to you soon, and take care. Stay warm. Bye.